This is the Linguistics Podcast. Questions or comments can be directed to Twitter at LinguistChris or via email to linguistchris@gmail.com. Hello and welcome to the Linguistics Podcast. My name is Chris, and on today's episode we're going to talk about recursion. But before I get to that, I wanted to first of all send out a thank you to everybody who's been sending me comments, both on Twitter and via email. I really do appreciate them, and I appreciate hearing that people are listening to and enjoying the podcast, so thank you for that. And I'd also like to extend out a sort of offer, and the offer is this. If you guys come up with any topics that are linguistically based that you think would make a good episode of the Linguistics Podcast, send it to me, and I'd be happy to look at it. And if I agree with you that this is a great topic, I could come up with an episode for this, or if I can relate another topic I had in mind to something that you're interested in, I will do that, and that way everybody's sort of happy, and this becomes better tuned to the listening audience. So I'd really appreciate it if you have any ideas, go ahead and send them to me either via Twitter or via email, linguistchris@gmail.com. And we'll get that going. Okay, so with that, let's discuss recursion. Now, I was sitting down the other day, and I was thinking, what can I go over in the Linguistics Podcast? Because obviously I had the sort of introductory episodes, which just did a brief look at the sort of classical linguistic subdisciplines, morphology, syntax, phonology, phonetics, semantics, that kind of thing. And I was thinking to myself, well, I can go into more detail on either one of those topics, and I can sort of pick a subtopic out of those and go over them. And I started thinking about syntax, and I was like, well, what can I go over in syntax? Because that's often very interesting to a lot of people. And I realized I hadn't touched on recursion at all in this podcast. And that's a no-no. You can't do that. You have to talk about recursion very early on in the study of linguistics because it's a very important concept. So I know in most of these episodes I've said, we're gonna go over topic X because it's extremely important in linguistics. But I think I just got around saying that because I made this new little intro for it. So I haven't repeated myself in this episode yet. Okay, so recursion. What is it? Well, if any of you are technically inclined, and by technically inclined in this case I mean programmers, computer programmers, you know that recursion comes up in programming. And basically in programming, what recursion is, in a nutshell, is a property of a subroutine or a function to apply to its own output. Okay? And it doesn't just show up in subroutines and functions, it also shows up in loops. So while or for loops in C-style programming languages are examples of recursion. So for all of you who have no programming experience and who just had that fly over your heads, don't worry. We're going to talk about it and it will become clear. Okay? Now, human languages have recursion all the time, and by all the time I mean all the time. There is no known human language which lacks the property of recursion. There is, and I know some of you who have studied linguistics extensively out there who might be listening now are saying, but wait, there's Dan Everett's article on Piraha, which claims that it's a language that lacks recursion. And notice how I presented that, claims that there's a language that lacks recursion. Dan Everett has gotten a lot of flack for that article. He still defends his position, I believe. Maybe not. I don't know, I haven't looked into it in a while. But in any event, it's dubious to say the least because it would be one out of some 6,000 human languages which apparently lacks recursion. And there's a lot of ways that it can be explained. Even if Dan Everett's account of the language is correct, there's still ways that you can explain the apparent lack of recursion through sociolinguistic means, for example. Maybe those structures do exist in the language, but they're not used for social reasons. That's one possibility. So we're going to leave Dan Everett's article out of this podcast, and we're going to say that all human languages have recursion. There's some other articles recently, well, somewhat recently in linguistics. One being, actually, I think this one's about 10 years old, if I remember correctly. It's by Chomsky, Hauser, and Fitch. Hauser, of course, got into some trouble with his review board, I believe, wherever he was working in the East Coast, but Chomsky, of course, is a big name anyway, and that article claimed that the only thing that separates human language from other animal communication systems, if you pull back all the way and you say, what is the one thing that we can say is a constant that always separates human language from animal communication systems, that would be recursion. Okay, that's one claim that this article made. So this is a big deal, right? Recursion is a big deal. So I know you're all chomping at the bit now. What is recursion? What is it? Okay, let's go into it. So, like I said, in computer programming, it's a subroutine that applies to its own output, and it's very much the same thing in human language. It's a rule of grammar. If you remember from our last podcast, it's a descriptive rule of grammar, which can apply to its own output. Now, if we're talking about syntactic rules, which we are, that means that you have the same label on both sides of the rule. So let's go into what that means. So I'm going to sort of give you guys some basic English syntactic rules. And of course, this being an audio podcast, I can't show you visual trees, which will make this slightly more difficult. But I'm going to go through it very slowly, and hopefully you can sort of visualize some of these things in your head and get what I'm saying here, okay? Now, if you think back to the syntax podcast, the initial syntax podcast, we had a basic syntactic rule that was a sentence can consist of a noun phrase and a verb phrase, if you remember that, right? So let's use that same rule, and we'll just expand on it and build a recursive structure out of that, okay? So S can consist of an NP and a VP. That's S being sentence, NP being noun phrase, VP being verb phrase. Also, I should mention that the mathematical associative property does not apply to language. So these rules, basically the idea is that order matters, right? So it's not that S can consist of NP and VP in any order. It can consist of NP and VP in that order. The noun phrase must precede the verb phrase in English, okay, in most cases, at least with this rule. Okay. So what can be an NP? Well, let's oversimplify that part to make this clearer. Okay, so let's say that a noun phrase can consist of the word Frank. Frank being a proper name. Can be a noun phrase. Now, if we were going to go more detailed into this, we would have to make a more detailed rule for building a noun phrase. But as an oversimplification, let's say that the name Frank can be a noun phrase. Okay? Let's also say that the name Mary can be a noun phrase. All right, so Frank or Mary can be noun phrases. Let's say that a verb can only be the word likes. Okay, the word likes, already inflected with the s at the end, can be a verb in English. Okay, now again, this is a vast oversimplification, but this should work. All right, and we know that a sentence can consist of a noun phrase and a verb phrase. So now all we need is, what is a verb phrase? Well, let's say that a verb phrase must consist of a verb followed by a noun phrase. All right, so it must consist of a verb followed by a noun phrase. Okay, so let's start with that. Let's try and generate that sentence. In fact, we should have let's see, we should actually have 4 sentences we can generate with just those rules. Okay, so let's think of one. So we start at the upper node, which is the S node, the sentence. We know that it branches off into noun phrase followed by verb phrase. Okay, so what can we fill in there? Well, we know that a noun phrase can be either Frank or Mary, right? Okay, so let's pick Frank. We'll just a random choice there. We'll just pick Frank. So Frank is that noun phrase. So that node is done. We know what the NP consists of. Let's move on to the VP, the verb phrase. It must consist of a verb followed by another noun phrase. Okay. So again, 2 branches off that VP as we build up this tree. Linguistic trees, by the way, if you haven't realized, have the sort of root at the top. So they're sort of upside down trees, right? So we'll branch down into the verb and another noun phrase. So the verb we know must be the English word likes, because we've defined it as such. And the other noun phrase must be Mary. Well, not must be, can be Mary, right? So we've made a sentence with these rules. Frank likes Mary. Perfectly grammatical. Now, what are the other possibilities? Well, we know that a noun phrase can either be Frank or Mary. And we haven't put any restrictions on having to not have matching noun phrases or having to have matching noun phrases for that matter. So we can actually construct 4 sentences. We can construct Frank likes Mary, we can construct Mary likes Frank, we can construct Frank likes Frank, and Mary likes Mary. Right now, the last two are sort of odd in their meaning, but syntactically correct. Okay? So, that's a very basic set of rules that allows us to construct sentences. Now, is it recursive? Well, no. We haven't added the recursive part yet. That's the next part. Okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to add another rule. Okay, another rule. Actually, 2 rules. Or 3 rules. Let's make it 3 rules. Okay, we'll start from the beginning, right? So we're going to add another verb, and that verb is going to be thinks. Okay, so now a verb can be either likes or thinks, and a noun phrase can be either Frank or Mary. All right? And then we're going to add something called a comp. Comp being short for complementizer, and that's going to correspond to the word that. T-H-A-T in English, that, right? And then we're going to make another category. So we have noun phrase, we have verb phrase, and now we're going to make what's called a complementizer phrase, or a CP. Okay? And that will consist of a comp and a sentence. A full sentence. All right, now this is where the recursion comes in. Now we know that an S corresponds to a noun phrase and a verb phrase. And so far we know that a verb phrase can correspond to a verb and a noun phrase. So we're going to add one final rule, which says that a verb phrase can also be a verb followed by a CP, a complementizer phrase. Okay? Now, what we've done to our set of rules is actually quite incredible. Okay, it's quite incredible. This is going to blow you away. All right? Okay, now before we get to the actual recursive part, let me reiterate these rules one more time to make this clear. Okay, and try and follow along with this. I know that for an audio podcast, this is getting to be a bit much. But let's see if we can stretch it, all right? So we have a sentence can correspond to a noun phrase followed by a verb phrase. All right? Now, possible noun phrases are Frank or Mary, are both noun phrases. A verb phrase corresponds to a verb followed by a noun phrase, or a verb followed by a complementizer phrase. Okay? Possible verbs are likes or thinks. Okay? A complementizer phrase is a complementizer followed by a full sentence, an S. And the only possible complementizer is the word that. T-H-A-T. So what have we done here? Well, what we've done is we've made a structure which is recursive. It can apply to its own output. Now let's go through how this will work. We know that Frank likes Mary is a sentence, an S, and that doesn't change. That's still an allowable sentence under our rules, right? What we have changed is the way that we can make a verb phrase. We know that we can put that sentence into a verb phrase now, because a verb phrase can consist of a verb followed by a verb followed by a complementizer phrase, and a complementizer phrase is a comp plus a sentence. Okay, so let's start there and work up. So we have this sentence, Frank likes Mary. Let's add the comp to make this a complementizer phrase. So we get that Frank likes Mary. Right? Okay, clear enough. That Frank likes Mary is a complementizer phrase. Now we know that we can make a verb phrase out of that by putting a verb in front of it, because a verb plus a complementizer phrase, according to our new set of rules, is a verb phrase. So let's pick a verb. Let's pick the other verb, thinks. Thinks that Frank likes Mary. Okay. Good enough. Now, we have a verb phrase there. So now we can combine it with a noun phrase and get a full sentence. So let's pick Mary as our noun phrase. I know we've already used her, but we can use her again. There's no reason we can't. It'll still be syntactically accurate. It might sound a little funky, but syntactically accurate and grammatical. So, Mary thinks Frank likes Mary. Now, that sentence makes more sense if you imagine that there's two Marys, right? There's Mary Smith and Mary Jones, and Mary Smith thinks that Frank likes Mary Jones, right? Perfectly grammatical sentence. Perfectly grammatical sentence. But what have we done? Well, we now have a full sentence which says, Mary thinks Frank likes Mary. And what can we do with that sentence? Well, we can re-embed it into the same position. So we can have things like, Frank thinks Mary thinks Frank likes Mary. Or, Mary thinks Mary thinks Frank likes Mary. Now, you can see it's sort of comical because we only have two possible noun phrases. But notice that we can do this in English all the time. This is a true rule of English. I think that you think that he thinks that she thinks that Frank likes Mary. We have a recursive structure. Now, what does this mean? Well, I believe we've used, 8 rules, 9 rules? But we have a countably infinite number of sentences that we can produce with these rules. We've removed the upper bound. So if you remember the first set of rules I gave you that didn't have the recursive structure in there, we could make 4 sentences. A total of 4 sentences possible with those rules. We add a couple more rules, and all of a sudden we can make an infinite number of sentences. An infinite number of sentences. There is no upper bound to the number of sentences you can make. Now this is very interesting because if you look at the Guinness Book of World Records, it has a longest sentence. Now, to be completely accurate, it has the longest sentence ever printed, which is still a valid claim because maybe nobody has printed a sentence longer than that. But is it the longest sentence ever uttered? Well, that's foolish, right? Because to break that record, all you'd have to do is put an I think that at the beginning of it, and you've got a brand new sentence. Okay? This is the property of recursion. It's the property for rules to apply to their own output, and it leads to what we call the infinity of language. The infinity of language. So that means that language is an infinite being, if you will. It has no limit to what can be expressed. In other words, there is no longest sentence in any language, not just English. There is no longest sentence. You can always make one longer. Okay? This is a crucial aspect of linguistics, and I like I said, I was surprised that I hadn't gone over it yet. But this is recursion. Okay, all languages do this in some form or another. Obviously, the rules will be different based on the properties of your particular language, but they will all share recursion somewhere in their rules that gives them this property, this way of having countably infinite sentences. Okay. So that's an incredibly important aspect of linguistics and an incredibly interesting one, I think, especially if you think of the implications of it. An infinite number of sentences. That's hard to wrap your mind around. And the reason it's even more interesting, and I should say this was noted at the end of the 19th century, this is not a new concept, but the fact that you have an infinite use of finite means, right? So we had, like I said, 8 or 9 rules, and infinitely many sentences generable from that. That's crazy. That's just a crazy concept to wrap your mind around. That's possible, right? So that's recursion in a nutshell, and we're sure to touch on it later on in future episodes because, like I said, it's an important thing, and it comes into play a lot, especially in syntax, which we just went over. So that's today's episode. I'm going to try and make these episodes more often. What's happened is my school has started back up again, basically. So I do have that going on as well. So I'm a little bit more busy than I was when I was on break. But I will try and make these more often. I'm going to try and release at least one per week. Okay, that's what I'm going to say. At least one per week. And when I have some free time, what I'm going to do is sort of record more than one at a time so that I can sort of still release one per week even if I get really busy. Okay, so that's my pledge to all you fine listeners out there, is I will try and get you new material at least one time a week. I think that's probably about average, maybe a little bit lower than average than most podcasts do. Most, I think, do maybe 2 per week, but 1 per week I think is my realistic estimate for all you out there. And I might release more than that, but I'll try not to release fewer than that. All right? So thank you as always for listening. I hope this has been interesting and helpful to all of you out there. Once again, I want to reiterate, if you have any topics you'd like to hear covered or a direction that you'd like to see me go in, I know that a lot of you listen to this podcast because you either haven't had this sort of linguistic backing in your studies, or because it's been a while since you've had it. So I know it might be difficult to sort of say, hey, what linguistic topic do you want to hear about? Well, obviously, if you know about it already, then you might not want to hear about it, right? So if you even have a direction that you'd like to look at, I can work with that, right? So if you say, I'm a Spanish speaker, and so I find that I'm really interested in properties of Indo-European languages that might be shared. I could do a podcast on that, right? The Indo-European language family, the Romance languages. What properties do they share? What are the sort of shortcuts you can use when learning one? That could be something I could go over. I'm just throwing things out there, and I'd really like feedback as to what you guys want to hear about, because I have felt like I'm sort of grasping at straws for topics, because linguistics is so vast in the things you can talk about. So if any of you can sort of provide me with topics you want to hear about, that would be much appreciated. Okay? So, thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks again.